Brought to you by MuleSoft, provider of the industry-leading Anypoint platform for APIs.
I'm Mark Boyd. I'm a writer with ProgrammableWeb. My background actually is I used to work in urban planning and public health, where I was helping cities around Australia and increasingly around the world in how to design cities for people rather than for cars, for example, or for businesses. And so I'm now trying to take that sort of information and have a look at how the Civic Tech field is emerging. Okay, so why now? Why now is it a good time? So then the idea of profiting from smart city APIs and looking at the business opportunities for entrepreneurial developers. Are you all, I'm presuming you're all developers, it's mostly a developer audience? Developers? Yep. And then, with an interest, obviously, in Civic Tech. Okay, so why now is a good time to get into the Civic Tech space? First of all, because cities are changing. Increasingly, the global population is an urban population. So here you can see population growth around the world is increasing, and then in all areas, at the same time, increasingly those populations are living in cities. So here on the second graph of that one, you can see the urban population increasing. So by 2030, there's an expected 60% of the world's population living in a city. But the city's also a disruptive force. Cities themselves are changing. The great inversion is occurring where instead of people instead of the whole idea of life being about moving further away from the city centre and having your own suburban McMansion, instead the idea is more to live close or in the city itself. People are marrying later. There's more temporary work, or people are moving between jobs over their life instead of having the one job for their entire life. And I mean, these are the changes that have just occurred in the last 20 years, and we're really seeing at a population level, these are really now disrupting a city makeup entirely. You also hear from people like Richard, Florida. There's the rise of the creative class and the startup city. So a lot of cities that are having more and more success are those that have a strong creative class to them. So a lot of designers, an artistic sort of generation, or a lot of people working in, I want to say, service industries or some creative industries. And so that is fueling economic development in those cities. So Richard, Florida would be a really cool guy to check out. He writes regularly around how that particularly is impacting on the American economy. You're also seeing changes from climate change and oil impacts. So as more natural disasters are happening because of climate change, but then you're also seeing some bigger effects as well from some of the hidden effects of climate change. So, for example, urban heat islands is a really huge impact that's causing a lot of early mortality in cities around the world, because a city is seeing a sustained increase of temperature for a longer period of time over summer, and the local population and the infrastructure can't actually handle even just that increase in temperature for a little bit longer. And then the impacts of rising oil costs as well, and then also things like the recent financial crisis. What that has caused also, and this is counter to the point about the rise of the creative class and all of this sort of stuff, is what we call a widening Gini coefficient, which is the measure for inequality within a society. So here's a look at from USA Today. They looked at American middle class, for example, and they were saying that in America, whereas it was 61% of the population was classified as middle class 40 years ago, that's now 51%. And here, I mean, it's not very good, sorry about the image, but here you can see for New York that the Gini coefficient is 0.5, and what that's saying is as the closer it gets to 1, the more unequal a society is. But you're seeing this replicated around the world as well, even in especially in environments like the UK and the US. But city governments are changing as well. So there is a move to this idea of the city government as a platform. So so you can see almost the city itself is the user interface shown at the top here. Then there's a range of applications or ways that services are provided, and then you've got the city administration or the city's assets at the bottom, and then the administration is sort of using these applications to respond to citizen need. I'll show you some more examples of this sort of stuff. But, like that part is called the government as a platform paradigm. You see growing support of open data. I mean, it's not as fast as we would like to presume, but open data support is growing around the world with local governments. There's a lot more policies amongst governments at the national and local level even to say that any new data supply must be in a machine-readable format or in an API format. So that's growing. There's a shift amongst local government. This one is particularly new, and I think this is why I think there is space in the Civic Tech area at the moment. It's because there is a greater shift by local governments to be able to use cloud services, which is something that's only emerged in the last year, as far as something that you're really seeing. Maybe it's the last few years, but it's really something I'm only seeing the chatter around now. And there is, because of the things like the financial crisis, city governments have to maintain or even improve how they're responding to citizen need, but they're often not given an extended budget, so they've got to do more with less. So again, that has helped drive this cloud services interest, but also is meaning that governments are starting to be a bit more creative. City governments and the rest, but we're looking at city governments for this talk. They're monolithic services, and they're often quite traditional and staid in their approaches. But because of this need to do more with less, they've moved towards a cloud environment, and there has been some breakup of this traditional way of doing things, where there is a little bit more willingness to work with entrepreneurs or to have a bit more of an agile sort of culture. And then alongside all of this, there's been the smart city paradigm that's been pushed. So things like attach a sensor to everything, and we'll have a really great network of knowing what's happening in our city. You see cities like Barcelona, where I'm lucky enough to live, that have now got sensors on all of their waste on all of their waste receptacles across the city. So they're able to then use that data to be able to plan their daily waste pickup collections, so that they're using the fleet more efficiently, less petrol, and they're only collecting the waste as it's needed around the city. And you see that sort of sensor-driven city management becoming more and more the norm. It's still very early days yet. I get carried away sometimes, and this is one of the problems of working in tech media, is we're often talking about things 2 steps down the track. So even with APIs, we've been doing this. We do this around open data. At the moment, you see this around Internet of Things all the time, as though we are living in the connected Internet of Things universe at the moment. But as you guys know from your development work, I'm sure it's actually still quite a few steps away, just as far as trying to get things connected and talking to each other. It's still all just talking to your phone and then your phone to a person sort of thing. But getting the machines to talk directly to each other still isn't happening. So I can easily get carried away in some of that future visioning. But we really want to keep talking about where we are now, so you guys see where the opportunities are if you want to get into this space. There is some automating of workflows and infrastructure. To me, like with enterprise, that's really only just starting to take off, and I think city governments are probably a little bit behind that. So I think that's something we'll see a bit more in the next couple of years, where they're starting to match up those processes. So, for example, there's some growing number of bike rental schemes around the world. So there is data being collected from those bike rental schemes around sensor, because there's a sensor in every bike, for example, and they're mapping when the bikes are taken from a bay and when they're returned to another bay, all of that sort of thing. So they know that. they're not really using that data to then inform, like the waste management, they're not using that to inform their fleet management about when to move the bikes around so that they've all got some bikes in each bay, and that you can find somewhere to put your bike back, all of that sort of stuff. No one's doing that sort of automated loop or using data to really connect the dots around that. Waste, I say they are. There's a lot, maybe 311, which is the shorthand for citizen complaints. So that's things like you ring up and you say, there's graffiti in my on the neighbourhood shop sort of thing, or the wall on the side of the park. Can someone come and remove it? So then that gets into a system, and then the loop should be that goes into a system. Asset maintenance is informed. They allocate the graffiti crew. The graffiti comes and cleans it, sends a report back, and then the council informs the citizen, yes, that's been responded. That whole loop, there's parts of that loop that are connected. So maybe the call gets told to asset maintenance, and asset maintenance tells the graffiti team. But it's not then coming back to informing the citizen that their complaint's been responded to, for example. So there's some of that automated workflow has been done, but certainly not all of it. So, and then finally, so you've got cities are changing, city governments are changing, and you've got tech is changing. This is from Michael Scott's work looking at cloud computing surveys. Awesome stuff this guy does, mjscott.com. Check him out, because he's also got an annual survey of open source and how open source is being increasingly used across enterprise, government, healthcare. Some really fascinating forward thinking from this guy. He's a venture capitalist and a serial startup entrepreneur. So here in this figure, can you see it that well? No. So it's got some... I'll just quickly mention it's got some key sectors or key domains, things like media and entertainment, e-commerce and payments, big data and analytics, social collaboration, and then you can see in between is the Lego bricks, the APIs. That's how tech's changing. Everything's been able to be transformed because of the APIs. Okay, so, and that's what Scott calls the transformative era. So the first era of cloud was just putting stuff on the cloud, digital assets, so that you're able to do the work remotely, sort of thing, if you like. Then this second stage of transformative era is where you're getting into a stage where you can deliver services in a way you never could before. So you can now, someone can buy something. Oh, I hate using retail examples, but all the same. So someone can buy something while they're traveling in a certain area based on their personal preferences, so it's sort of because of a context around them. So maybe like say they want to book a restaurant after going to see a football match. So they're in a certain area, they can get details of when this restaurant's got a booking availability, they're on the way, they're all doing it all remotely, and from the mobile they can make that booking. That's something that you could not, that's not a service you can do without the cloud. And so that's what Scott is talking about, this transformative era. That's the very beginning of it. The one example I really hate, I'm sure you've all heard, is about how personalisation and context means that as you're passing a shop, you'll be able to send a discount coupon to your phone telling you that you can get a discount on something in that shop. That's to me, that's a very weak, hyper-local advantage. I don't know why anyone would want that anyway. That's not really the sort of user experience you want to sort of get out of hyper-local. But I think but because that's trotted out so much, I think that indicates the lack of creativity around the potential of what the cloud is really offering. So again, it's a wide open field as far as the things we can think about. That's my point too, I guess. I've just said it there. Third of all, health data rights are changing. So we see a big lead from this in the US, but UK fits very much with the culture here. And that is that more and more people want the right to their own healthcare data. So, and so there's been new legislation that's been brought into states like California that insists that any large health provider that holds data about their about their patients, that the patients have the right to access that data. So you're going to see more and more of those sorts of policies come into place. I'd really love it if that extends to things like wearables as well, so that any person who is using a wearable device has the rights to be able to access the data in a usable format at the end of the day. A lot of the times we don't even get to use that even amongst the wearable tech. Fourth is the tech is changing as far as open data. There, like I was saying earlier, there's a growing use of public open data, but also in corporate fields as well. There's and particularly in social. So there's a lot more you can do around mining Twitter feeds and all of the rest. So there is all of this sort of data that's becoming available. I'll talk more about that later. There's more technologies that are enabling you to scrape the web for data and create your own data sources, and then use available algorithms. That's my next point, to be able to then make some calculations about what people might need next, or what people might be doing next. And you see that growing with a whole range of sort of artificial intelligence algorithms and predictive analytics. One of the first things you've often got to do in those fields is create a concept knowledge base first, so that your AI knows the context around which you're talking. So so by using open data, remixing the web, you can sort of build this sort of concept map of your domain area faster, and then apply predictive analytics. I think I've got a bit more on that right here. Okay, so why might you be interested in getting into the civic tech space? First of all, the time is now. Like I've been mentioning, there are these, this convergence of cities changing, city governments changing, tech changing, so there are the opportunities. It can be a reliable income source, because governments, once they've got a relationship with a supplier, and they do tend to have longer customer lifetime values with those suppliers. So it can be, it's hard to get them on the hook, but once you've got them on the hook, then they can be a longer-term reliable income source. As I've pointed out, there are growing market opportunities, and we'll describe some of these more. If you're interested, and this one I'll really break down in the next section of this presentation, but if you're interested in where hyperlocal is heading, where API platforms as a business model is heading, then working in civic tech gives you a chance to really explore and see how that plays out earlier than if you're working from a product and then trying to build that up and get value from, or create a system that has transaction value between groups of users on your platform. So civic tech can help you get that there faster. There's a strong recognition of the value of open source amongst government technologists, and there's growing and faster use of API standards in civic tech as well. So if you're interested in contributing back to the field, then there are greater opportunities in civic tech to be able to sort of start building on more open source resources. And then one of the biggest things that I've heard from a lot of developers who have gotten into the civic tech space is they find it much more satisfying work. Quite often they're surprised by the decision-making process, which is not agile, so it can take a very long time. I've also heard from a number of government officers that governments are sometimes they're more comfortable making some of the really big decisions, and they'll take their time making those really big decisions. But when there's smaller decisions around some of this sort of civic tech, they can just go into a sort of frozen paralysis by analysis sort of phase. And a lot of civic tech does get frustrated by the fact that they're not willing to make these smaller decisions that might move them forward. So there is that, but once you are working with some cities around providing solutions for local residents, then there's a much higher level of satisfaction in their work. So how do you get into this? Okay, here are the roles of local government, or here's some of the roles of local government. It varies in different jurisdictions, but you can see a whole heap of areas where perhaps there's a specific domain that you're interested in, or where there is something that you're thinking that maybe there is a product you could offer. In open data circles, they often talk about, I thought it was here. I'll get to that in a sec. Okay, so here's sort of all the different fields of local government. You can see recreational activities, so parks management, that sort of thing. They deliver services, traffic management, urban planning, land use mix, all the rest. Here's what I've learned from looking at a range of civic tech startups. This is the natural evolution of a civic tech startup. So on the far left, they start with a service or product for a specific geographic area. And they might create an app out of that. But in doing that, and then they want to think about how to make this viable and work in other cities. But to do that, then they realise they need open API standards so that it will work in another city jurisdiction. And then they see what happens behind the scenes with government take-up and all of that. And so then that means that they realise they need to become a platform. So instead, they're going to have to be a platform that's going to be able to take all of these different data sources from different cities, convert them into a single API, and then from there, people can build products out of that. So then what they're doing is they're becoming that platform. Then they might themselves build apps on top of that, which is that the next one on the right and the top. So they might build that, or they might open up their platform so that other developers can come along and build apps themselves for that. So that's one aspect. Then the other aspect is that you also see then some developers come in as consultants on that level, and what they're doing is then they're using that platform API type approach, and then they're working with individual governments to be able to create visualizations or help analyse data better for a particular civic government need. I'm going to get into some examples and show you some more in a sec. Then there is an emerging second wave of innovation that's, I would say, coming. I would say it's not really here yet. We're seeing very early stages of this, but if you can think faster or further ahead than other people, then you're in an advantage here. And that is then making all of these things link back to an Internet of Things or a smart cities sort of paradigm. And then also, I think there's other ones. The second question mark is things like predictive analytics and AI and how that's going to feed into this as well. Again, I've got some examples coming up. So if you're entering this space, the questions that I would suggest that you ask yourself is, first of all, look for, if you want to build an app as a way to start, it's a good way. Product is a good way to enter into a platform play anyway, because it gives you something tangible and real to start thinking about. So you could look at, for a local government, open data API source that you can use to build a product or a service. From there, while you're building that, you then start thinking about the platform play. So the next one, are there API standards? Who's in charge of those standards? Do you need to create an abstraction layer that would be able to take, if you were going to become viable to or build this product for another geographic region, what would you need to change with their API to make it readable or comparable to your initial API? So what sort of abstraction layer might you have to build? Do you have relationships with any specific or subject experts, or can you build those relationships in that domain? And then do you have the willingness, or do you have relationships with government agencies that you can also build up? Then as you go along, what you could also do, instead of coming at it from the left-hand side, you could come down from the top right and instead look at, is there an existing platform already for this civic tech domain? And if there is, can you, or if it's got strong contenders, or if it's becoming a crowded space, and I'll show you some of the crowded spaces in a minute, then can you build apps off that? Because maybe that's the opportunity. It's a bit like Concur with their travel data, which we just heard about in that previous one. So instead of you trying to do all of the business travel expenses API stuff, you just build products for that market by using the Concur API. And in the same way, maybe you can use some of this. I've got some examples there. Or can you become a certified partner for that platform and maybe around a specific geographic zone so that you're being able to be the sole provider of solutions that use that platform in a particular zone. Finally, they're then thinking a few steps ahead around the IoT stuff. How will IoT, this is really difficult to think about, but if you've got in the back of your head, how will IoT and sensors and predictive analytics then disrupt this or transform even those processes that you see from the local app to the platform to the ecosystem? How can the humans that are entering stuff or being the citizens as sensors, how will that transform once the IoT can do that? Instead of, the IoT sensor infrastructure can do that rather than the individuals. And can you get there first and be able to help cities manage that process or help automate that? Okay, so then when you choose it, so then basically what I'm suggesting, maybe what you could do is choose a role of local government, then start building that app on the first one, or start building the ecosystem app on the top 3 small apps on the side thing, and then go from and then answer those questions, and then bippity-boppity-boo, you've got a viable business. So one of the areas to look for to start with will be the opportunities. In open data, there's a general thinking from a guy called Mark Head, who used to be the head of Philadelphia's open data program, and he says buses, bullets, and bucks. But then other people have added to it and have said blight as well. So if you're looking at open data across cities, the ones that are most advanced as far as platform goes are public transport, so the buses, the transparency and the spending, which is the bucks, crime and safety. Everyone wants hotspot visualizations of their crimes in their local area, so the bullets. And then the potholes, the graffiti, that sort of civic complaint issue, which is your blight. So those areas you'll tend to find they're like either a crowded market or they've got strong contenders in there then. So for those ones, you might be wanting to build one of those apps in the 3 satellite apps off the platform on the third one. There. The other ones, I think it's still very wide open. Maybe parking and traffic management is starting to see a fair few players, but they're very localised. So lots of opportunity. Let's look at some examples of some successful Civic Tech that's already working in this. Transport API, Harry Wood was talking in a previous session. They didn't really start with that product at the start. They're a bit unusual in that case because they had a number of people who were involved with setting up the London Data Store, which is the open data repository for the city of Greater London. And they've had people who are involved with transport data mapping for many years. So they were able to jump straight to that second one. I think I've got another example. I don't think I've included it in here. Amigo Cloud, which is able to take any geographic type of data source and make it usable to anyone else on their platform, Amigo Cloud. They've done a bit the same because a lot of them are from Esri in the back. So while they didn't have that product to start with, they sort of worked on the product approach because of where they came from. So maybe it's about finding co-founders who are already working on products in a specific domain, for example. So in this case, Transport API, they had strong relationships with all the transport data providers in London, and they've been able to build agreements with those to get their data supply, to be able to access that data stream. Then from out of that, then they're able to offer SLA, so service level agreements, to their developer ecosystem so that their developers can build products that use that API stream that they've abstracted through their platform, and then be able to be confident that they're going to be able to provide the data to their end customers as they need it. And what's really exciting is you see them jumping to some of those hyper-local ideas that aren't about walking past a window and getting a coupon in your pocket for something you never knew you ever needed. So instead what they've got is things like Toothpick are using their system. So Toothpick is an online dentist booking service where you can go you can look up Toothpick, and they'll show you every dentist agency, or pretty much every dentist agency in the UK. And then from there you can book your appointment directly online, and then you can also see how they get there via public transport, or more importantly, how they get home, I guess, if you've had filling, or if you've had a local anaesthetic or something. So all of that you can map, you can sort of do directly on the site, and that is all the engine behind making that hyperlocal information available is the Transport API. So then Toothpick, they find that when customers know that sort of local level of information, then they're more confident making a booking. And what's more is they are more likely to attend that booking as well. So cancellations in healthcare are way down because of being able to have a hyperlocal experience with it. And so then Toothpick charge a percentage of the booking fee from the dentist for met appointment, and then they just charge the API calls from Transport API. So it's sort of also, so not only is it, look, the evidence is still out on whether it's a viable business. It's early days yet, but then not only is it a strong contender, but then also it is creating a whole new ecosystem of hyperlocal businesses, or certainly contributing to that. Screech TV is the second example. What they do is they're the ones who stream content in like pubs or in public spaces on big TVs. So what you might have in a pub is you've got the footy on the TV, and then at the bottom it'll tell you when the next bus is leaving from the bus stop down the road. So you can wait and see that, and then they'll tie in their own advertisements. So they'll say, if you want to catch the 10:50 train from Liverpool station or whatever, you've still got time to have a hamburger and chips, or have it at your table in 5 minutes or whatever. So they're able to sort of upsell their own services while also providing this transport data, and it means that they've got their customers in their venue right up until the final minute, sort of thing. So they've been that's proving to be quite a viable business. And again, it's that hyperlocal opportunity that's much more interesting, I think. Okay, so that's one example. Here's the blight example. In the UK, I think you've got FirmStep, which is helping cities manage their civic data, and then opening up that civic data via a API standard called Open 311. So in the US, Open 311 is like you dial 911 for the police, you dial 511 for information about the city, and you dial 311 if you want to make a complaint about, you know, a pothole or graffiti or broken window on the local library or something like that. And then that standard, that idea of 311 has turned into an open 311 API standard around the world. And so what that does, and even so, even though it's not called 311 everywhere, they're often using that same API standard. And what that does is it then coordinates how a system would categorise the complaints coming in. So, you know, name of complainant, address, nearest crossroad, what the issue is, and there might be, depending on the city, they might use 100 codes or they might use 10. Like some cities will have snow ploughing, other cities won't need that. That sort of stuff. A date and time of complaint, who it should be go to, all of the rest. So that's part of their Open 311 standard. And then you see people like FirmStep and in the US, SeeClickFix are using that API standard on their platform. So here I've got mostly SeeClickFix as the example. So for example, they built an app initially where people could just make a complaint about their local area. The pothole on this corner hasn't been filled for a week now, or something like that. Then they quickly realised, because of the number of users wanting to complain about those sorts of things, they realised that they could turn that into a platform and share that data as an open API call. So with, you know, some provisos around anonymising the complainant and the rest. So they quickly became a platform which then they were able to sell back to local governments. So in some instances, it's just like a crowdsourced a civic tool to just talk about your own city. But in a lot of cases, or increasingly, Civic Fix are then able to go to a civic government and say, look, a lot of our users are using our platform to report a local issue. Why don't you buy our platform and integrate it into your asset maintenance and city repair systems? So you see it. So Civic Fix have been able to build or are building a viable business based on that. Then technically you could then get some apps that are built out of that, perhaps visualizations to show where those complaints are coming from, and collected via the C-Click Fix platform. A lot of that data about those complaints is being opened up. I find polite a bit tricky, and I would caution against going into this field for a viable solution, because I'm not sure that there are many scalable solutions that you can create out of this data. Like, maybe it's about, if you want to become someone like Map Data Services in Australia, what they've done is they've been able to build a agreement with crowdsourced, city-sourced, which is the equivalent of C-Click Fix or another provider like C-Click Fix. So they've become the exclusive provider of city-sourced 311 platform in Australia, and then they've built relationships with, say, Gold Coast City Council, where they're building the mobile app so the Gold Coast Council can receive reports via the app that's built on the city-sourced platform, and then put it into their civic complaint system and respond to potholes and all the rest. So by doing that, Map Data Services have been able to show they've been able to save the city $300,000 in managing abandoned vehicles, for example, in 1 year, just because of being able to build that and allow citizens to identify when a car's been abandoned. So I think there's some viability opportunities there. That's more of a consultancy base, so that's not going to be that scalable entrepreneurial opportunity if you're really looking to go gangbusters global. But if you've got more modest sites about just getting a reliable income stream and a good business model for you and your small dev shop, then possibly that's one way to go. For the other way might be around visualizations and all the rest. I'll just talk quickly but what is good, because Open 311's like 10, maybe even 20 years old now, so it is a bit more advanced as a platform than some of the other examples we're looking at. So what I really like about this is it shows how then it can turn back into like a smart city type approach. So where you had a citizen reporting there's a pothole, and then that going into the system with asset maintenance responding and all the rest, then what you see different here is, or where you see this next heading, is that there are then connected car devices like Mogio, for example, which is tracked into a car's processing, digital processing bank straight away. So it's able to take all of these different measures about what's happening with the car. And one of those things is you can fit those into the city's fleet. So then the city's fleet, as it's going around the city, if it's on the waste management vehicles or on outreach cars or whatever from the city workers' carpool, then what that can be automatically detecting the potholes when it runs over and feeding it in the system. So then the sensors are becoming the sensors rather than the citizens are becoming the sensors. One good thing about citizens as sensors is a heightened civic engagement. So with the IoT, you need to sort of consider, are you removing those opportunities for civic engagement, or how do you then still maintain participation with cities while you're moving to this IoT? There's also some interesting examples where this data, the Open 311 stream of data, is then being used with predictive analytics to identify where graffiti hotspots might be coming up, and then so in order to be able to better respond or provide a presence in those areas. And that's sort of a bit better than what you're seeing. Like I think New York recently had a stop and frisk policy. You see this in Australia all the time, where there's high levels of racial profiling around potential crime risks. And so instead, this is actually looking at a more equitable way of identifying where there might be areas of risk without profiling individual people in the population. Okay, I don't want to get into bucks because I don't have enough time and it's too huge. And I only just heard about Spend Network from Eric Freifogel today. Is that how you pronounce it? Freifogel today. So add Spend Network to this. But there is open spending in data.gov.uk, and again, it can show where a city is spending its funding, and you can get a lot of that by API and then try to match up. It's still a lot of the work isn't being done, so you've got like budget on one side and expenditure on another, but you're not really being able to see if budget and expenditure are aligned, sort of thing. But it's work in progress, but huge if you want to get into that. Again, the commercial opportunities out of that, maybe some of them is about identifying where the next civic tech opportunities are based on spending, or where there's industrial opportunities. So it could be sort of like a data research field. A lot of this is used about transparency and accountability of government, so which is less on the commercial opportunity and more on the social good side. Okay, bullets. This to me is a really open area for a platform play. You get a lot of hotspot maps and visualizations, the bottom corner, so they're specific geographic areas. What doesn't exist is a platform for APIs around crime data. That's because a lot of different police jurisdictions collected in different ways, and they may have there's different statistical analysis that's being applied. So it's very difficult, for example, in the US to compare homicides in Chicago to homicides in Baltimore. There's quite a number of statistical cleaning activities that need to happen before you can make comparable data for the same time, and at a 10,000 population scale or whatever. So there is a great opportunity for scaling of that, and I think in somewhere like the UK, where there is a lot more data conformity across jurisdictions for crime data, that you would have a greater chance of building that sort of platform first. But you do need to have your data scientists on board, I think, to be able to start building some of that platform out. But I think it's an open opportunity. And then from that, the sort of apps that you could build, you're already seeing in the States, sites like Zillow are using this to then be able to incorporate more intelligence into their real estate data. So it's helping people make decisions about whether to buy a house based on a range of indicators, and one of those indicators is crime level or safety in those local neighbourhoods. So it's already been seen there. I think there's a big opportunity to hustle in this space for consultants as far as providing some of the visualizations back to local police departments as well, about how to better coordinate their patrolling when they don't have an active case that they need to send units to. Where should they be patrolling with a limited police roster at nights, for example? This sort of data can help them identify those areas. I think there's a whole heap of stuff that still needs to be done around being able to use this data around things like identifying where your next liquor outlet could be, like and whether or not an area is saturated already and causing violence in that local area. This sort of crime data isn't really being used to be able to make those arguments. Maybe there's a play there around working with business insurance agencies around helping them better calculate the business risk if there is a business that's selling alcohol next door to you, or even if you're wanting to operate that. You're seeing some IoT, and we've got Marco in the back of the room from Evercam, and I'm sure this sort of stuff will be something that the Evercam platform will be able to help speed up as well, as around some of the opportunities to move into a smart city paradigm with this. In the US, there's something called ShotSpotter it's been attached to some across a local government area to all of their telegraph poles, for example, and from that they're able to identify when gunshots were fired in those local neighbourhoods and be able to respond faster because of that sort of IoT sensor. And I think it's just being able to detect the flash or something like that. So there are those sorts of moves into IoT, and again, like we saw with Blight, there's the predictive analytics opportunity to identify where street patrols are needed, and so on and so forth. Okay, and beyond. One of the other ones, the final one I'll mention is a new one called Spatial. They're a group called, the business is called Trailhead Labs. So they started off by creating park trail data for the Bay Area Open Space Council, so that the Bay Area Open Space Council can produce maps of where to hike in local parks. So they produced that as an app product. When they produced that, they then realised that all of this park data needs cleaning up across the US. So they started to be involved in open standards for park and rec data, and then by doing that, they identified some of the needs and challenges that were addressing cities. So then, as one of their products, they created the Spatial platform, which then normalises all parks data across the US and then enables anyone to create apps out of that. So then they're creating apps that then they're selling or they're able to sell to specific cities and counties, and then they're opening up that platform to partners so that others can create apps or become a consultant that could then create visualization. So, for example, a lot of cities want to be able to have better visualizations of their park trails on their websites. And so this is creating an ecosystem opportunity for consultants to be able to work with individual cities using the Spatial platform to create those visualizations where that's not being done in-house. Okay, where to start? Sorry, I've just realised I've only got 4 minutes to go. I don't like hackathons. The 4 things I would go with instead are looking for challenges, incubator programs, consultancy projects, and then there is ideas of self-invested labs. What do these mean? One, there's challenges, particularly in the US, there's challenges.gov. Across Europe, there's campus-labs.com. Now, what you can see, I don't know if it's that clear. Can you see that the prize amounts are like 450,000, 500,000? I mean, they do come down. There's some like 20 or 30,000. But it's not about creating a hackathon over a weekend, which is a bit ridiculous. But instead, they're solving real problems. And I've chosen a screenshot from like page 3 of challenges.gov where it's submissions are ending like end of the year. So it's not like you're given overnight to get it done. It's more about what you can do is use this as a research opportunity. If it's happening in the US, maybe there's a market in the UK for this, or in Europe as well. So again, looking at those with the furthest deadline dates and working back from there as far as how could you build a team in that area? Could you be servicing this solution? CityMart.com is a really interesting startup. They're taking a reverse procurement approach. That's happened with Madrid and Moscow so far. It's happening with a few other cities as well, where the city will post problems that the city's trying to solve. So, for example, in I think Barcelona did one around stolen bicycles. So then developers can submit any solution at all that might solve that problem, or that would help solve that problem, and then and in that way gain a procurement opportunity. And by doing that, maybe out of that there's a scalable model that you can then replicate across the world. Campus Labs is another sort of challenges type base, and it's European as well. I think at the moment there's 80,000 euros up for grabs in their latest one. Then have a look for cities with incubator programs. Fireware is a European-wide platform that's been funded by Future Internet out of the European Commission. Interesting model, I think, to look at, all based on open APIs. There's a lot of code there's code for America, but in other jurisdictions, code for Pakistan's opened up, for example. I think there's code for Australia. They often have a incubator wing that's trying to encourage startups to work with Civic Tech opportunities. Open Data Institute are doing that. They've just got a new set of incubator startups involved. London Travel Tech Labs. There's Bristol. I've got some really interesting stuff happening with an incubator program. I think Leeds is really investing heavily in their open data mill, so they'll be having an incubator program if they don't already. If you want to look at what cities will be following, New York City has just finished their Big Apps program. So instead of it being about hackathons, they've had a staged process over a number of months to really nurture startups being involved. And I think that model you'll see much more replicated around the world soon, and there's points of light, which I don't have time. So consultancy opportunities, I've talked about the map data services example, but it might be about where if there is a platform already involved, you can maybe identify, you can either work with those platforms and then work with, and then provide that service back to the city. And then there's self-invested labs. So with that, the big one to watch will be DataKind. What they do is, because they've got those resources on board already, they provide these 3 particular services for free to help solve city governments. And out of doing that and providing building open source tools, they then identify where future commercial opportunities may come. And they've already started building those relationships with those cities as well. Twilio.org rather than .com is really interesting. They've got a set of open source Twilio related products, and they're inviting not-for-profits to work with them. So again, that might be the sort of model where you can, if you've got enough backing yourself, where you can farm off a day a week of your dev team to get into this space. Maybe that's an opportunity. So sorry, I've run out of time, but so I'll just sprint through this and make the slides available. Or talk to me afterwards. So if you do start in that bottom corner, that's fine, but have an eye to working in the viability zone, so trying to get to a platform as quickly as possible, or working off an existing platform and building a service that way. Check where there are open data APIs. I think in the US, it's about 40% of cities have open APIs, but you're looking where the raw material is available, if you like, to be able to do this. So in some jurisdictions, it's just the whole work, your whole first set of work might be trying to encourage them to open their data first, before you can even start building whatever you want to build. So in other cases, it might be best to try to find an open data city that's got a bit of push behind this already. And in fact, along with that, there are some emerging API standards. So once you've identified your API the domain you want to work in, you could also look at some of these sources and see where the data standards work is being done and try to jump in on that. Okay, you can also look at what data people want. So working from the user experience point of view, there's sites like this, it's a Government UK one, where you can look at what has been the most popular data content from UK citizens. So that might suggest to you which of those local government domains you might want to work in, because there is an audience interested in data products out of those areas. A really underused one is looking at freedom of information requests, because this is evidence that people want that data. And here you can see it's very small, but a lot of it is around things like housing and land use data. So maybe there's some products and opportunities built out of that. Okay, one of the big final takeaways, I should have mentioned this much earlier, is stay under the procurement threshold. So what a lot of startups that I've been describing, the way they've gotten their foot in is because they're working below the procurement policy levels that local governments might have in place, which then just become too time consuming and too foggy to know whether or not you're going to get out the other end. So if you can price your product or price your entry point below the UK's policy standards for thresholds, you've got a much more likely chance of getting local governments to be able to respond without going to tender and you submitting all of that. Then build relationships with local government. Even if you're doing, this one is probably good for non-Civic Tech startups. So here you can learn from the Uber and the Airbnb problems. They should have started building relationships with local governments much earlier in their life so that they could prevent some of those regulatory hassles they're having now. But the Chief Data Officer has often been appointed in a lot of new, is starting to become a new role that's been appointed in governments. And then with that, they need to get runs on the board. So they're wanting to see people and citizens and businesses using the data supply that they're managing. So by meeting with the chief data officer, and here you see an open data startup in Paris, first day of the Parisians' chief data officer, day on the job, he met with them at their startup. So you can build relationships very quickly by focusing on those sorts of key roles within government, and then also with that, look over the open data plans and strategies from a local government and see where they've got next wins that they need to achieve. And is there any way that your Civic Tech idea might be able to help them achieve those wins? And then if you want to come from a user experience point of view, go back to that city government's citizen surveys or community needs and look at where communities are dissatisfied with what's happening in their local area and see if you can think up a solution around some of those. Then and again, the pro bono and local project opportunities that I talked about earlier. And then my final point is, if you're really unsure of where to start, maybe choose one of those domains that I listed earlier from local government and try to build a city dashboard just around this. You see a lot of this, city dashboards for the whole of the city. I don't know that they're very useful at all. They don't tell you enough that you can work with, but they look very pretty. But what you could do is instead go to waste management and then try to look at, levels of citizen satisfaction around cleanliness. Who are contracted to provide the city waste services? What's the level of recycling in that city by neighbourhood? And once you get into that and then start trying to build a dashboard just around that issue, then you start to see where the open data APIs are available, where the API standards are, and therefore what the opportunities that might come if you wanted to scale a product. So it might be something fun to do as a way to start and gives you a bit more focus as far as how you might scale about this. And I'm really getting the sign to finish. Thanks to all these people, and there's my details. I'm sorry for going over time. Cheers.
Brought to you by MuleSoft, provider of the industry-leading AnyPoint platform for APIs.